Hi there, welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're stepping into a world where paintbrushes become weapons and theatre suits. You're standing in a muddy field somewhere in France, 1944, watching what appears to be an entire armoured division rolling into position. 30-ton Sherman tanks grinding through the soil, soldiers shouting orders, radio chatter crackling through the air. But here's the thing. If you walk up and punch one of those tanks, your fist will go straight through it because it's made of rubber. And those soldiers, they're art students from Brooklyn. Welcome to the most creative con job in military history. Now, before you drift off thinking this is some fantasy tale, you should know that if you'd actually been there, the Nazis would have shot you for discovering their secret. So maybe count yourself lucky you're hearing this from the safety of your bed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these bedtime stories travel. All right, let's begin the story. You're watching history unfold in early 1944 as American military planners huddle in a smoky Pentagon conference room, wrestling with an impossible problem. The Allies are preparing to invade Europe, but German intelligence is everywhere, and every American unit's movement is being tracked, analyzed, reported. Someone at the table, historians still argue whether it was Colonel Ralph Ingersoll or another creative genius, suggests something that sounds insane. What if we create fake armies? What if we use artists to paint illusions so convincing that German high command will move their real divisions to fight our imaginary ones? The brass exchange glances. It's crazy. It's also brilliant. Within weeks, recruitment begins in the most unlikely places. You're watching officers stride into art schools, advertising agencies, and theatre companies. They're not looking for the usual square-jawed warriors. They need painters who understand light and shadow, set designers who can create illusions, audio engineers who can make speakers sound like tank engines. At Cooper Union in New York, an officer interrupts a life drawing class. "Gentlemen," he announces, "your country needs your artistic talents, but not in the way you'd expect." Young men who'd spent their lives avoiding conflict suddenly find themselves volunteering for something they don't fully understand. You see Bill Blass, yes, the future fashion designer, putting down his sketchpad and raising his hand. Ellsworth Kelly, who'll one day have paintings in every major museum, signs his name on the dotted line. These aren't soldiers. They're artists who spent more time arguing about Picasso than practicing with rifles. The recruits are told almost nothing. They board trains to Camp Forest, Tennessee, where the transformation begins. You watch these bohemian artists, still reeking of turpentine and cigarettes, trying to figure out military discipline. The drill sergeant takes one look at their soft hands and paint-stained fingers and mutters something unprintable. But orders are orders, and these unlikely warriors must be molded into something unprecedented. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, soon to be known as the Ghost Army. The morning mist at Camp Forest clings to everything as you watch these artists stumble out of their barracks, still half asleep and wholly unprepared for what's coming. A sculptor from Chicago trips over his own boots. He's never worn anything heavier than loafers. The drill sergeant's voice cuts through the Tennessee humidity like a rusty saw, and you can't help but smirk as these Greenwich Village intellectuals attempt jumping jacks with all the coordination of newborn giraffes. But something fascinating happens over the next few weeks. Between the endless push-ups and kitchen patrol duties, classified equipment begins arriving in unmarked trucks. You peer into one crate and blink twice. It's filled with speakers the size of refrigerators. Another contains what looks like Hollywood makeup supplies. The artists exchange knowing glances. Whatever they've signed up for, it's not conventional warfare. The training splits into specialized units, and you follow a group into a warehouse that's been transformed into the strangest classroom you've ever seen. An intelligence officer stands before a wall covered in German military insignia, teaching these artists to recognize enemy units by their shoulder patches. You need to paint these perfectly, he explains, because German observers will be studying you through binoculars. The fashion designers in the group lean forward, genuinely interested, finally, something that makes sense to them. In another building, you discover audio engineers hunched over massive recording equipment, capturing the sounds of real tank battalions. They're learning that a Sherman tank's engine has a distinctive whine at exactly 2,300 RPM, and German intelligence officers know this sound by heart. One engineer, a jazz musician from Harlem, jokes that it's like learning to fake Louis Armstrong's trumpet style, except if you hit a wrong note, people die. You notice how these artists adapt differently than regular soldiers, where traditional troops learn through repetition and muscle memory. These men approach warfare like a creative problem. A set designer from Broadway sketches tactical movements like blocking for a stage production. A painter discusses camouflage theory with the passion he once reserved for debating Impressionism versus Cubism. They're not becoming soldiers in the traditional sense. They're becoming something entirely new. The social dynamics fascinate you too. Here's a surrealist painter bunking next to an advertising executive, sharing cigarettes and stories about pre-war New York. Class distinctions that seemed insurmountable in civilian life dissolve in the face of shared confusion and purpose. You overhear late-night conversations where they still debate whether Duchamp's fountain was really art. But now, these debates happen while cleaning rifles. Physical training remains a comedy of errors. You watch one particularly memorable morning when a Princeton-educated architect attempts the obstacle course and gets tangled in the rope climb like a spider's breakfast. But here's the thing. Historians still argue whether the army deliberately went easy on physical standards for these men. They're starting to understand that their real weapons won't be their trigger fingers, but their imagination. The weeks blur together in a haze of contradictions. Morning calisthenics followed by afternoon lectures on the psychology of deception. Rifle practice interrupted by classes on Wehrmacht radio protocols. You're witnessing the birth of a military unit that shouldn't exist, trained in skills no field manual covers. These men who once painted portraits are learning to paint entire fake armies. Musicians who played Carnegie Hall are preparing to perform for an audience that wants them dead. As their training nears completion, a sobering reality sets in. These artists are about to enter a real war with fake weapons. They'll face real bullets while hiding behind rubber tanks. The bohemian bravado that carried them through recruitment begins to crack, replaced by a quieter, more complex courage. You see it in their faces during final preparations. They're artists about to perform the most dangerous show of their lives. Where a bad review means a German artillery barrage, the ghost warriors are almost ready. Though calling them warriors still feels like a cosmic joke. They're actors, painters, and dreamers dressed in olive drab, preparing to stage the greatest illusion in military history. You're standing on a dock in New York Harbor, watching the most surreal military shipment in history being loaded onto transport vessels. Crates marked top secret contain what looks like a demented toy store's inventory. Rubber tanks that 4 men can lift, collapsible trucks that fold like origami, and enough inflatable equipment to stock a very warped carnival. A longshoreman accidentally drops one crate, and a rubber tank turret bounces out like a giant beach ball. The ghost army soldiers scramble to stuff it back inside while Navy personnel pretend they didn't see anything. The crossing to England gives you time to appreciate the sheer audacity of what's being attempted. In the ship's hold, engineers run final tests on their inflatable arsenal. You watch them unfold a rubber M4 Sherman tank, and within minutes, compressed air transforms a pile of olive drab rubber into something that, from 50 feet away, looks absolutely real. The artists have painted every rivet, every weld mark, every streak of mud and oil. One soldier jokes that it's like blowing up the world's most dangerous balloon animal. But these aren't just any balloons. The rubber comes from the same company that would later make Macy's parade floats. Historians still argue whether the Ghost Army inspired those giant floating characters or vice versa. Each tank weighs 93 pounds deflated, but looks like 30 tons of steel when fully inflated. You run your hand along one and feel the texture the artist added: fake rust, simulated battle damage, even bird droppings for authenticity. It's method acting for military equipment. The detail work borders on obsessive. You peer into a workshop where artists age brand new equipment to match battle-worn units. They've studied actual tanks returning from combat, noting how mud splatters in specific patterns, where oil leaks typically occur, which panels get scratched by tree branches. A painter from Rhode Island spends 3 hours adding authentic-looking exhaust stains to a rubber tank's rear panel. When someone suggests he's overthinking it, he snaps back. German reconnaissance takes photos from 2,000 feet up. One detail wrong, and real soldiers die. The inflatable technology presents constant challenges. Early models deflate in strong winds, leaving dead tanks littering practice fields like popped balloons. Engineers develop better valves and reinforced seams, but you still witness the occasional catastrophic failure. Imagine a Sherman tank suddenly developing a leak and slowly sagging like a disappointed souffle while German observers potentially watch through binoculars. The soldiers develop contingency plans involving strategic smoke screens and hasty repairs that would make any bicycle mechanic proud. You follow the equipment to a secret training ground in England, where the Ghost Army practices their grand deception. It's like watching the world's strangest theatrical rehearsal. Soldiers practice inflating entire armored divisions in under 2 hours. They learn to move deflated equipment at night, setting up fake encampments that must look lived in by dawn. Coffee stains on maps, fresh tire tracks leading to rubber vehicles, laundry hanging between inflatable trucks. Every detail must suggest thousands of soldiers where only a few dozen exist. The Sonic Deception Unit works alongside the visual team. You watch them position speakers in precise formations to create sound perspective. Tanks must sound distant or close, depending on the observer's position. They've discovered that sound travels differently over water than land. That fog amplifies certain frequencies while muffling others. A former radio sound effects artist explains how he layers recordings. Tank engines as the bass, add metallic clanking for movement, sprinkle in soldiers shouting, finish with mess kit noises for meal times. But here's where it gets truly surreal. They must also create the absence of sound when needed. Real armies make constant noise, but they also have quiet moments. Guards coughing in the night, someone dropping a wrench at 3 a.m., a sergeant chewing out a private for smoking on duty. The Ghost Army must script these human moments into their performance. You realize they're not just creating fake equipment, they're creating fake lives. The British officers observing their training remain skeptical. One colonel watches an inflatable tank crew go through their morning routine and mutters something about Americans and their Hollywood nonsense. But when the Ghost Army stages a full demonstration, complete with fake radio traffic, sound effects, and a scripted accident where a jeep appears to hit an inflatable tank, even the skeptics fall silent. From the observation post, it's completely convincing. You're crouched in a French hedgerow at 3 a.m., watching sonic engineers perform what might be the strangest concert in history. The speakers, each one weighing 800 pounds and requiring special shock-mounted trucks, are positioned with mathematical precision across 2 square miles of countryside. A former NBC sound effects artist flips switches on his control panel, and suddenly the empty fields come alive with the phantom presence of an armored division that exists only in carefully layered recordings. The technology seems almost magical in its complexity. You peer over the operator's shoulder as he adjusts what they call the mixboard from hell, hundreds of dials controlling individual speakers spread across the landscape. Tank engines rumble from the east, but metallic maintenance sounds clang from the north. He's painting with sound, creating a 3-dimensional audio sculpture that must fool German acoustic reconnaissance teams who've spent years memorizing the exact frequencies of American military equipment. The preparation for each sonic deception reads like a demented symphony score. You study their notation system, symbols indicating when to fade in mess truck arrival sounds, or crescendo. Tank maintenance hammering. One engineer shows you his proudest creation, a recording of soldiers complaining about food, captured at Fort Knox, now playing on a loop so realistic that actual GIs walking past stop to commiserate with the non-existent gripers. But here's where you realize the terrifying brilliance of the concept. Sound travels much farther than sight at night. While inflatable tanks fool observers during daylight, these sonic illusions work around the clock. German listening posts, some positioned in church steeples 10 miles away, strain to interpret every audio clue. The Ghost Army must create soundscapes so convincing that enemy intelligence will redirect entire divisions based on what they hear in the darkness. You follow a sonic car on patrol, a half-track mounted with special speakers that can project sound directionally. Tonight's mission: simulate a tank column moving through a village. The operator, a former jazz drummer from Philadelphia, times each effect with percussionist precision. Engines rev as the phantom column appears to slow for a turn. Gears grind as inexperienced drivers seemingly struggle with transmissions. He even plays a recording of a sergeant swearing at someone who's apparently jackknifed a tank trailer, so authentic that a real military policeman rushes over to help with the non-existent traffic jam. The acoustic physics involved would make your high school science teacher weep with joy. Sound behaves differently based on temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure. You watch engineers consult weather reports like ancient oracles, adjusting their playback frequencies to compensate for how sound will bend through tonight's specific air conditions. A recording that sounds perfect at sea level becomes distorted in mountainous terrain. They've learned that frozen ground carries bass frequencies farther, while summer wheat fields absorb high-pitched mechanical whines. The library of sounds they've amassed borders on obsessive. You flip through their catalogued recordings. Sherman tank idling, cold engine. Sherman tank idling, warm engine. Sherman tank struggling in mud. Sherman tank backing up over gravel. They've captured mess kits clanking, welding torches hissing, even different types of military coffee percolating. One recording labeled simply "Soldiers Laughing at Dirty Joke" comes with a note. Use sparingly. Too much joy sounds suspicious. Technical failures haunt every mission. You witness one catastrophic night when a power surge blows out half their amplifiers just as a German patrol approaches. The engineers frantically rewire speakers while the guards prepare to defend their position with real bullets against an enemy drawn by fake sounds. They manage to restore power just in time to broadcast tank column departing sounds that send the Germans scurrying to report the movement of units that never existed. The psychological warfare aspect fascinates you most. These sound engineers aren't just creating noise. They're crafting narratives that German intelligence must believe. A tired armored division sounds different from a fresh one. Experienced crews maintain their tanks differently than rookies. The Ghost Army learns to embed these subtle stories in their sonic performances. Historians still argue whether some German commanders went mad trying to track phantom units that seemed to violate the laws of physics, appearing and disappearing across impossible distances. You realize these artists have weaponized sound itself, turning speakers into instruments of deception more powerful than any conventional weapon. Every successful sonic illusion means real Allied units can move undetected elsewhere. Every German shell fired at empty fields with fancy speakers is one not aimed at actual soldiers. The sonic engineers know this equation intimately. Their fake sounds equal real lives saved. You're hunched inside a radio truck that smells of cigarette smoke and electrical wire, watching operators perform the most intricate deception of all, creating entire phantom divisions through Morse code alone. A Yale-trained linguist taps out messages with the distinctive fist of a lazy staff sergeant he's been impersonating for 3 weeks. Every radio operator, you learn, has a signature rhythm like a fingerprint. German interceptors know these patterns intimately, and one misplaced dash could unravel months of careful deception. The radio team operates like method actors who never break character. You study their files on fictional personnel. Major Thompson, who supposedly runs the motor pool, always starts messages with an unnecessary weather report. Corporal Martinez in supply has a tendency to abbreviate everything except curse words. These imaginary soldiers have developed personal quirks, grudges, and friendships that play out across the airwaves in dots and dashes that German intelligence meticulously charts. The technology seems primitive compared to the sonic unit speakers, but the skill required is astronomical. You watch an operator simultaneously manage 3 different radio sets, each broadcasting as a different unit. His left hand taps out routine supply requests, while his right hand sends urgent tank repair updates. He pauses occasionally to light a cigarette with his foot, a trick he learned specifically for this job. Between transmissions, he maintains the dead air patterns that real units create during shift changes and meal times. But here's what makes your skin crawl. Every fake transmission must correspond with observable reality. When the Ghost Army's radio operators report that the fictional 9th Tank Battalion is low on fuel, inflatable tanks in that sector stop moving for precisely the time it would take to refuel. When they broadcast complaints about worn tank treads, visual deception units scatter pieces of actual broken treads along roads. The Germans cross-reference everything, and one inconsistency between sight and sound could expose the entire operation. You flip through captured German intelligence reports that make the stakes crystal clear. Wehrmacht radio interceptors have identified individual American operators by their typing patterns. They know that Sparky, in the real 4th Armored Division, always hits the letter E slightly too hard. They've noticed that afternoon operators tend to be sloppier than morning shifts. The Ghost Army must replicate these human imperfections perfectly while inventing entirely new ones for their fictional units. So, the codebooks alone represent a masterpiece of creative writing. Real military codes are dry, functional things, but Ghost Army cryptographers must create fake codes that seem real, while containing enough errors for German codebreakers to crack. You examine one example, a supply request that, when decoded, reveals the fictional 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion is expecting replacement parts from Detroit. German intelligence will note this, check their industrial espionage reports, and find that yes, Detroit did increase production of those exact parts last month. Every lie is wrapped in layers of verifiable truth. Training these radio operators pushes beyond conventional military instruction. They study theatre, learning to inhabit characters completely. A former method acting coach teaches them to develop backstories for their fictional operators. What did Sergeant Phillips eat for breakfast? Is Lieutenant Cooper left-handed? These details never appear in transmissions but inform the rhythm and personality of each operator's keying style. You watch one trainee spend hours perfecting the slightly drunk evening transmissions of his character, a supply sergeant with an implied drinking problem. The pressure breaks some men. You witness one operator freeze mid-transmission, suddenly unable to remember which unit he's supposed to be. Another develops a nervous tic, unconsciously tapping out his real unit's call sign between fake messages. The radio section maintains the highest transfer rate in the Ghost Army. Not everyone can handle living multiple electromagnetic lives while knowing that German direction-finding equipment constantly hunts for their real positions. Technical innovation keeps pace with deception needs. Engineers develop radio spoofers that simulate the electrical signatures of different transmitter types. They create devices that add authentic static and interference patterns. One brilliant technician invents a mechanical hand that can tap out Morse code with inhuman consistency, perfect for simulating new, nervous operators. Historians still argue whether German intelligence ever suspected they were listening to robots playing human. You realize these radio operators are fighting an invisible war where success means never being noticed. Every boring supply request, every routine position report, every mundane weather observation builds a fiction so complete that German generals bet thousands of lives on phantom armies conjured from dots and dashes. The radio operators know they're playing chess against unseen opponents who analyze every transmission for the one false note that reveals the illusion. You're pressed against a stone wall in Brittany, watching the Ghost Army execute its first major performance in the liberation of Brest. A crucial port city the Allies desperately need. Real infantry units are preparing to assault German fortifications, but the enemy has reserves hidden throughout the peninsula. If those reserves reinforce Brest, thousands of Allied soldiers will die taking the port. Your job, or rather, the Ghost Army's job, is to make the Germans think the main attack is coming from somewhere else entirely. The operation unfolds like a deadly piece of theatre. In fields 20 miles east of the real attack, you watch Ghost Army units inflate an entire armoured division as the sun sets. The timing is crucial. German reconnaissance planes make their last pass at dusk, and everything must be perfect. A rubber tank develops a leak just as a Fokker-Wulf appears on the horizon. 4 soldiers casually stand around it, pretending to perform maintenance while one frantically patches the hole from inside. From the air, it looks like a routine repair. From the ground, it's barely controlled panic. The sonic units position their speakers to project sound toward known German listening posts in the ruins of an old monastery. You hear them broadcast the carefully scripted chaos of an armored unit preparing for dawn assault. Tank engines warming up, officers shouting coordinates, fuel trucks arriving with squeaky brakes. A former Hollywood sound engineer grins as he adds his favorite touch, a recording of someone dropping a wrench, followed by historically accurate American profanity. But Brest teaches the Ghost Army a harsh lesson about the difference between theatrical deception and military reality. German artillery observers, fooled by the display, call in coordinates. You dive for cover as real shells whistle overhead, exploding among fake tanks with very real violence. Shrapnel tears through rubber Sherman tanks like tissue paper. One sonic truck takes a direct hit, scattering electronic equipment and, miraculously, leaving the crew with only minor injuries. The Germans are shooting at illusions, but their bullets and shells are solid steel. Radio operators work through the night in a bunker that shakes with each explosion. They must maintain the illusion even under fire, continuing to broadcast routine messages as if the armored division hasn't noticed it's being shelled. One operator, blood running from a shrapnel cut on his forehead, taps out a request for more tank ammunition with rock-steady hands. His fictional sergeant would be calm under fire, so he must be too, even as plaster dust rains from the ceiling. The deception works better than anyone dared hope. German commanders, convinced the Ghost Army's position represents the main threat, redirect 2 panzer companies away from Brest. You watch through binoculars as real German tanks rumble toward your Phantom division, their crews prepared to fight enemies made of rubber and recordings. Meanwhile, actual Allied forces slam into Brest's weakened defenses from the opposite direction. Success brings its own complications. The Ghost Army must now simulate a fighting retreat, making it appear their damaged armored division is pulling back under German pressure. Engineers deflate selected tanks, leaving them crumpled in fields like destroyed vehicles. The sonic unit broadcasts recordings of American casualties and equipment being towed away. Radio traffic fills with calls for medics and mechanics. They're staging a defeat that must look convincing enough to let German commanders think they've won a significant victory. You help pack up equipment as dawn breaks, moving through fields cratered by very real German artillery. The contrast is surreal. Soldiers fold up 30-ton tanks and stuff them into trucks, sweep up battle damage that's mostly scattered speakers and torn rubber. One private jokes that it's like striking a set after the world's most dangerous play. But you notice his hands shaking as he rolls up a deflated tank riddled with actual shrapnel holes. The after-action reports reveal the operation's stunning success. Brest falls 3 days earlier than projected, saving an estimated 5,000 Allied casualties. German intelligence files, captured later, show they remained completely fooled, crediting their forces with severely damaging an American armored division that never existed. One German report describes in detail the poor morale observed in the retreating American tanks, a tribute to the Ghost Army's acting abilities. But success carries weight. These artist-turned-soldiers now understand they're not playing elaborate pranks, but engaging in warfare where deception saves real lives. The celebration is muted as they clean equipment still marked by German shell fragments. They've proven the concept works, but they've also learned that even fake soldiers can die quite real deaths when the illusion becomes too convincing. You're shivering in a Luxembourg forest in December 1944, watching Ghost Army artists perform their strangest assignment yet, becoming human forgeries. The winter light filters through bare trees as soldiers carefully paint division insignias onto vehicles. But these aren't their real unit markings. A former commercial artist from Detroit meticulously recreates the Thunderbird symbol of the 45th Infantry Division on a Jeep that belongs to the 23rd. Every brushstroke must be perfect because German observers hidden in the Siegfried Line are watching through high-powered scopes. The detail work has evolved into an obsessive art form. You study the reference material spread across a frozen truck hood. Photographs of real unit patches showing exactly how paint weathers, where mud typically splashes, which corners fray first. The Ghost Army has discovered that German intelligence catalogues these minutiae with scientific precision. One artist shows you captured enemy documents that describe American uniform variations down to the thread count. "We're not just fighting soldiers," he mutters, breath misting in the cold air. "We're fighting art critics with artillery." This mission pushes beyond equipment deception into human theatre. Ghost Army soldiers must impersonate members of units currently fighting 50 miles away. They wear the wrong patches, carry the wrong equipment, frequent the wrong bars in nearby villages. You follow a group into a Luxembourg tavern where they loudly discuss their unit's plans while nursing weak beer. The bartender's daughter, everyone knows, reports to the Germans. These Americans are performing for an audience that wants them dead. Method acting where breaking character means breaking operational security. The psychological strain shows in small ways. You notice soldiers unconsciously covering their fake patches when real Allied units pass, afraid of being called out as imposters by their own side. One private confesses he's forgotten which unit he actually belongs to after 2 weeks of pretending to be from the 4th Armored Division. The identity confusion runs so deep that mail call becomes surreal. Men receiving letters addressed to their real names while wearing fake unit insignias, like actors getting personal mail delivered to the theatre. German observers make the mission genuinely dangerous. You spot the telltale glint of binoculars from a church steeple 2 miles away, known to harbour enemy spotters. The Ghost Army performs for these distant critics, soldiers ostentatiously checking maps with fake unit markings visible, truck convoys carefully timed to suggest specific troop strengths. One sergeant stages an elaborate argument about fuel supplies. Knowing German intelligence will analyze every word that carries across the winter air. The artists adapt their craft to winter conditions. Inflatable tanks look wrong in snow. Their bases don't create proper depressions, and they don't accumulate ice like real metal. Engineers develop weighted frames to make realistic track marks. Artists learn to paint frost patterns on rubber surfaces. You watch them scatter coal ash around fake vehicles to simulate the heat patterns of running engines. Every detail must survive scrutiny because German forward observers will have nothing better to do than stare at American positions all day. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. The Ghost Army must also create negative space, the absence of units that have secretly moved. When the real 75th Infantry Division shifts positions, Ghost Army radio operators continue broadcasting from their abandoned frequencies. Visual artists leave behind convincing debris, empty ration cans, worn tent stakes, latrine screens positioned exactly where departing units would abandon them. They're sculpting military ghosts from garbage and radio static. Local civilians add unpredictable elements. You witness a farm girl approach Ghost Army soldiers, asking in broken English about her boyfriend in the real 45th Division. The soldiers, wearing 45th patches but having no idea who she means, must improvise excuses. Children beg for chocolate from units they think they recognize. An elderly man tries to return a wallet to someone in the 4th Armored Division, forcing quick-thinking soldiers to promise they'll pass it along. Each interaction risks exposing the deception to German agents mixed among the refugees. The culmination comes during a carefully orchestrated accident. A ghost army truck, prominently marked with false unit insignias, breaks down on a road visible from German positions. Soldiers spend hours performing elaborate repairs, ensuring observers get plenty of time to photograph and report the fake unit's presence. Meanwhile, the real division these men are impersonating launches a surprise attack 30 miles north, catching German defenders completely off guard. Winter deception extracts its toll. Frostbite doesn't care if your tank is rubber or steel. German shells aimed at phantom positions still spray shrapnel through real trees. You help evacuate an artist who lost 2 fingers to the cold while painting authentic ice formations on inflatable equipment. He jokes weakly that at least he's not a pianist. But everyone knows the war is carving pieces from these men who came to serve with brushes instead of bullets. You're standing on the western bank of the Rhine River in March 1945, watching the Ghost Army prepare for what everyone knows is their most critical performance. The Rhine is Germany's last major natural barrier, and the Allies need to cross it. The real assault will happen at Remagen, where American forces have miraculously captured an intact bridge. But if German reserves rush to Remagen, they could destroy the bridge and trap advancing units. The Ghost Army must create a massive diversion, suggesting the main crossing will occur miles away. The scope of this deception dwarfs all previous operations. You watch engineers inflate not just a few tanks, but entire landing craft flotillas. The rubber boats look absurdly convincing bobbing in the river current, complete with fake outboard motors and crews of mannequins dressed in combat gear. Artists have painted water stains and algae patterns so realistic that actual Rhine fishermen try to sell fresh catch to the boat crews. The Ghost Army soldiers must politely decline while maintaining the fiction that they're preparing for an amphibious assault. Sonic units face their greatest challenge yet. Water amplifies and distorts sound unpredictably. You observe engineers spending nights in small boats, dropping hydrophones to map the river's acoustic properties. They discover that engine noise travels upstream differently than down, that certain frequencies skip across the water like stones, while others sink immediately. A former submarine sonar operator adjusts their equipment with grim precision, knowing that German listening posts on the opposite bank will catch any false note. The enemy is close enough to touch. Through binoculars, you can see German soldiers moving in their positions just 800 meters away. They're watching you just as intently. This proximity transforms every action into performance art. Ghost Army soldiers must appear nervous but not too nervous, busy but not frantically so. They smoke cigarettes with the calculated casualness of men preparing for a dangerous river crossing they know won't happen. Radio deception reaches new heights of complexity. Operators create an entire assault timeline through carefully scripted transmissions. Supply requests for waterproofing materials, medical units checking blood plasma supplies, engineers discussing bridge-building equipment. Each message builds toward a crescendo of false intelligence. You listen to one operator, portraying a harried logistics officer, argue with headquarters about ammunition deliveries with such conviction that nearby real units start asking if they should be concerned about their own supplies. The pressure manifests in unexpected ways. A Ghost Army private, tasked with maintaining inflatable assault boats, becomes so invested in his deception that he starts genuinely planning how he'd cross the river. He sketches assault routes, calculates current speeds, even writes letters home about the upcoming crossing, before sensors remind him he's describing an operation that won't happen. The line between performance and reality blurs dangerously when you're playing soldier in an actual war zone. German artillery provides deadly punctuation to the performance. Shells scream across the Rhine, targeting the fake preparations with enthusiastic accuracy. You dive into a foxhole as explosions walk through the inflatable armada, sending rubber boats cartwheeling through the air like toys. The surreal sight of a deflated landing craft draped over a tree, still being shelled by German 88s, captures the insane logic of the Ghost Army's war. The enemy is wasting precious ammunition on illusions, but those explosions are real enough to kill. Technical failures nearly compromise everything. A power surge shorts out an entire bank of speakers just as they're broadcasting crucial bridge construction sounds. Engineers work frantically by flashlight, rewiring circuits while German flares turn night into stuttering day. They restore power just in time to broadcast the sounds of heavy equipment arriving. Sounds that convince German commanders to keep their reserves positioned against a threat that exists only in carefully orchestrated noise. The most dangerous moment comes when a German patrol crosses the river on a reconnaissance mission. You hold your breath as enemy soldiers creep past inflatable tanks in the pre-dawn darkness. One German reaches out and almost touches a rubber Sherman before his sergeant hisses at him to keep moving. They're so focused on reaching their observation point that they miss the impossible lightness of American armor. The Ghost Army sentries let them pass, knowing that engaging would reveal the deception. Everyone waits in silent terror until the Germans paddle back across the Rhine, apparently satisfied with their intelligence gathering. As dawn breaks on the operation's final day, news arrives. American forces have successfully expanded the Remagen bridgehead while German reserves remained fixed in place, staring at rubber boats and listening to recorded engines. The Ghost Army begins deflating their synthetic navy, rolling up their artificial invasion like a Hollywood set strike. German observers watch this withdrawal and report that the Americans have abandoned their crossing attempt, never realizing they've been guarding against ghosts. You're belly down in mud near the German border when the illusion finally shatters. A Wehrmacht patrol, moving faster than intelligence predicted, stumbles directly into a Ghost Army position at dawn. Through the ground fog, you watch a German sergeant's face transform from confusion to comprehension as his boot goes straight through what should be a solid tank tread. For one crystalline moment, both sides freeze, Americans clutching deflated rubber, Germans processing the impossible sight of collapsible armor. Then hell breaks loose. Real bullets shred fake tanks with sounds like aggressive popcorn. You scramble behind an actual tree as MG-42 fire turns inflatable Shermans into abstract art. A Ghost Army corporal, trained to create illusions, now fights with his M1 Garand to defend those illusions. The cosmic absurdity hits you. These artists are in a real firefight over fake equipment, bleeding actual blood to protect rubber and air. The sonic unit truck takes multiple hits, its precious speakers exploding in showers of sparks and shredded wire. Thousands of dollars of equipment, months of recorded sounds, vaporize in seconds. But the operators don't flee. You watch them destroy classified materials even as bullets punch through the truck's thin walls. One engineer, blood streaming from a scalp wound, methodically smashes frequency codebooks with a hammer. If captured, These documents would reveal every Ghost Army position across the European theatre. Radio operators face an impossible choice. Breaking radio silence would expose the deception to German intelligence, but they need to call for help. You hear the section leader make the hardest decision of his life: maintain the fiction. Even under direct fire, they continue transmitting routine messages as their fictional units, pretending nothing unusual is happening. A young operator from Boston taps out a casual supply request while machine gun rounds stitch patterns in the wall above his head. The German patrol seems more shocked than the Americans. You glimpse their faces, young Wehrmacht soldiers trying to comprehend why the Americans are defending balloon tanks with their lives. One German shouts something that sounds like a question, perhaps asking if this is all some elaborate trap. The Ghost Army's very existence is so improbable that the enemy hesitates, wondering what kind of deadlier deception might lurk behind the obvious one. Help arrives in the form of a real armored reconnaissance unit that happens to be passing nearby. The irony is sharp enough to cut. Actual tanks rescuing fake ones. You watch M8 armored cars roar into position, their very real 37mm guns engaging Germans who are still trying to process what they've discovered. The firefight is brief but vicious. When the smoke clears, several Ghost Army soldiers need medical evacuation, and the Germans have been driven off. But not before getting a good look at the deflated deception. The aftermath is controlled chaos. Engineers work to destroy any equipment the Germans might have photographed. You help pour thermite on electronic components, watching months of careful engineering melt into unusable slag. Artists burn their reference materials, sketches of unit insignias, paint formulas for authentic-looking rust, notes on German observation patterns. The accumulated knowledge of military theatre goes up in smoke that smells of failure and necessity. But here's what amazes you, even in retreat. The Ghost Army maintains its performance. As they evacuate the compromised position, they leave behind carefully chosen debris to confuse German analysis. Real shell casings mixed with rubber tank fragments. Authentic military documents, carefully edited, scattered among the ruins. They're improvising a new deception to mask the blown deception, creating layers of lies to protect the truth that American military intelligence has been running an elaborate con game. Casualties return to consciousness confused by their surroundings. One wounded private keeps asking why the tanks didn't fight back, his concussion mixing reality with the illusions he's been maintaining. A medic, himself part of the Ghost Army, gently explains while dressing wounds that the tanks couldn't fight because they weren't real, but the blood is, and that's all that matters right now. The philosophical implications of bleeding for fake causes would make Sartre weep. The incident report, classified beyond top secret, reads like surrealist poetry. Enemy engaged inflatable armored division. Casualties sustained defending rubber equipment. Sonic deception unit destroyed while broadcasting fake tank noises. Radio operators maintained fictional transmissions throughout actual combat. Historians still argue whether German intelligence ever fully understood what they'd stumbled upon, or if the Ghost Army's desperate defense convinced them they'd discovered something even more secret than elaborate theatre. You realize these artists have crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. They're no longer performers in a safe deception, but soldiers who've killed and bled for their illusions. The rubber tanks have shrapnel holes now. The fake army has real Purple Hearts. The distinction between authentic and artificial has dissolved in gunpowder and necessity. You're rifling through a footlocker in a bombed-out Belgian farmhouse when you discover them. Hundreds of sketches hidden beneath fake bottom panels. wrapped in oilcloth like contraband. These aren't military documents, but art in its purest form. Portraits of exhausted soldiers, landscapes of war-torn villages, still lifes of ration cans arranged with the same care once given to bowls of fruit. The Ghost Army's artists, forbidden from documenting their classified operations, have been secretly recording everything else. The sketches tell stories that official records can't capture. You find a drawing of inflatable tanks at dawn, their rubber surfaces pearl-like with dew. Rendered with such tenderness, it makes these instruments of deception seem almost alive. Another shows German POWs staring at deflated Shermans with expressions of bewildered betrayal. A portrait captures a radio operator mid-transmission, his face a study in concentrated performance, every line etched by the weight of maintaining multiple fictional identities. You trace the evolution of artistic styles shaped by war. Early sketches show optimistic caricatures, visual jokes about rubber tanks and painted patches. But the lines grow heavier, the shadows deeper. A series dated after the Rhine crossing depicts real casualties among fake equipment. Medics working on wounded soldiers while deflated tanks loom like collapsed dreams in the background. The artist's technique has matured through trauma, finding beauty in the absurd horror of their situation. Some pieces blur the line between documentation and expression. A watercolor shows sound waves rippling from speakers across a French meadow. The audio rendered visible in blues and greens that suggest both pastoral peace and electromagnetic warfare. You find abstract compositions where tank silhouettes dissolve into musical notation, then reform as radio static. These aren't just war sketches, but attempts to process an experience that defies conventional representation. The artists develop a visual language for deception itself. Repeated motifs emerge, mirrors reflecting nothing, shadows cast by absent objects, negative space given form and weight. One haunting piece shows a self-portrait where the artist's face is half flesh, half rubber, his identity fragmenting between authentic self and performed fiction. You realize these men are documenting not just a war, but a fundamental questioning of reality itself. Technical innovation appears even in their private art. Someone has developed a technique for making paint from tank grease and local clay, creating earthen tones that perfectly capture the mud of the European theatre. Another artist builds brushes from communication wire and human hair, tools that leave distinctive marks suggesting both delicacy and violence. They're using the materials of war to document war, form-matching function in ways no academy would teach. You discover collaborative pieces where multiple artists work on single compositions. A panoramic sketch of a fake encampment bears different hands. One artist's precise architectural lines, another's loose figurative style, a third's atmospheric washes. They're unconsciously creating a collective vision. Multiple perspectives synthesizing into truth more complete than any single viewpoint could achieve. Historians still argue whether these represent the first open-source war art, democracy of vision born from shared deception. Personal details emerge through marginalia. Tiny sketches in corners show moments of humanity, soldiers sharing cigarettes, a French child teaching GIs to juggle, a stray dog adopted by the sonic unit. One artist consistently includes small self-portraits in his work, tracking his own transformation from clean-shaven optimist to hollow-eyed veteran. You can chart the war's progress through the degradation of his face, each sketch a timestamp of accumulated exhaustion. The most powerful pieces address the moral complexity of their mission. A triptych shows the same landscape in 3 stages: peaceful village, ghost army deception drawing German fire, actual destruction from misdirected shells. The artist neither condemns nor justifies, simply presents the cause and effect chain of military theatre. Another piece depicts inflatable tanks ascending to heaven like bizarre angels, questioning whether fake weapons carry real moral weight. Discovering these works feels like archaeology of the immediate past. You carefully preserve each sketch, knowing they represent evidence of humanity, persisting through dehumanizing circumstances. These artists came to war with brushes and left with brushes, but what they paint has transformed entirely. They've documented not just military operations, but the surreal experience of living as professional liars in history's most honest conflict. Later, you learn that many ghost army artists destroy their war sketches, fearing court-martial for documenting classified operations. Others hide them so well they won't surface for decades. But here in this farmhouse, holding these fragile papers that smell of foxholes and fixative, you're witnessing the birth of a new art movement, combat surrealism, where truth is a lie and lies save lives, where the most authentic expression comes from those paid to be false. You're reading captured German intelligence files in a monastery turned Allied headquarters, and what you discover makes your blood run cold with retrospective fear. The Wehrmacht's analytical reports on American troop movements are masterpieces of detail, except half the units they meticulously track never existed. Page after page documents the Ghost Army's fictional divisions with the same certainty given to real ones. German commanders made life and death decisions based on these phantom forces, and thousands of soldiers died attacking or defending against military mirages. The German methodology impresses and terrifies you. They've created entire biographical files on Ghost Army inventions. Colonel Richardson of the non-existent 119th Tank Battalion has a full psychological profile based on his radio personality. German analysts note he seems tired lately, possibly drinking, based on subtle changes in Morse code rhythm. They're right about everything except the fundamental fact that Richardson is 3 different radio operators sharing a fictional identity. Maps spread across the monastery's stone tables show the war from Germany's perspective, and it's like looking at constellations where half the stars are imaginary. You trace red pins marking Ghost Army operations the Germans never recognized as deceptions. At Brest, they confidently recorded destroying significant elements of an armored division that was actually rubber and air, near Metz. They claimed to have forced the withdrawal of American forces that were already deflated and packed in trucks before the German victory. The psychological profiles are darkly hilarious. German intelligence has identified American units as lacking aggressive spirit based on their tendency to avoid direct combat. These are Ghost Army units that literally cannot fight. One report expresses frustration with the cowardly 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, who always seem to retreat when pressed. The analyst never realizes he's critiquing the combat performance of inflatable tanks and speaker systems. You find Wehrmacht radio intercept logs that make your hands shake. German operators have recorded thousands of Ghost Army transmissions, carefully noting patterns, building complex organizational charts of units that exist only in electromagnetic imagination. They've identified supply problems in phantom divisions, tracked personnel changes in fictional command structures, even detected morale issues based on subtle variations in radio chatter. It's intelligence analysis as unwitting creative writing collaboration. The acoustic intelligence reports reveal how completely the sonic units fooled German ears. Or engineers have calculated American tank quantities based on engine noise intensity, never suspecting they're counting the same recorded sounds played through multiple speakers. One report praises German artillery for forcing Americans to maintain strict noise discipline. In reality, the Ghost Army simply turned off their speakers to simulate tactical silence. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. German commanders trusted this false intelligence over their own soldiers' eyewitness accounts. You read court-martial proceedings where Wehrmacht troops were disciplined for defeatist reporting, when they claimed American positions seemed strangely empty or that tanks appeared to deflate. One sergeant was demoted for insisting he saw American soldiers carrying a Sherman tank. His superiors deemed this obvious battle fatigue hallucination. The Ghost Army's deception was so complete, it made truth-tellers seem insane. The financial calculations stagger you. German quartermasters allocated millions of Reichsmarks worth of ammunition, fuel, and supplies to counter Ghost Army threats. Entire rail networks were reorganized to support operations against fictional American advances. You find requisitions for winter equipment rushed to units facing non-existent enemies. The Third Reich spent treasure it couldn't spare fighting ghosts, while real Allied forces advanced elsewhere. Human intelligence reports provide tragic comedy. German agents in French villages report extensively on Ghost Army units' off-duty behavior. They've noted which fictional sergeants drink too much, which imaginary officers are harsh disciplinarians, which made-up units have the best food. Resistance members risked their lives gathering intelligence on American forces that were actually art students from Brooklyn pretending to be tank crews. The layers of deception created their own reality. The medical reports are perhaps most surreal. German field hospitals prepared for specific types of casualties based on the fictional equipment Ghost Army units supposedly operated. They stockpiled burn treatments for phosphorus shells the Phantom artillery would never fire. Surgeons studied wound patterns from weapons that existed only as sound effects. Wehrmacht medical staff made life-saving preparations for battles that could never occur. You close the final intelligence folder feeling dizzy from the magnitude of the deception. The Ghost Army didn't just fool German intelligence. They created an alternate reality so convincing that enemy commanders preferred it to truth. Historians still argue whether this represents the greatest intelligence failure in military history or the Ghost Army's greatest artwork. Perhaps it's both. The Germans built a precisely detailed map of American forces where every second unit was fictional, then navigated by that map straight into defeat. You're standing in a field near Viersen, Germany, watching the Ghost Army prepare their final and most ambitious performance. It's March 1945, and the real Ninth Army needs to cross the Rhine for the final push into Nazi Germany. But the Germans have reinforced every likely crossing point. Operation Viersen will be the Ghost Army's magnus opus, simulating 2 entire divisions, 30,000 men, to draw German forces away from the actual assault. If this works, thousands of American lives will be saved. If it fails, the Rhine crossing could become a bloodbath. The scale defies comprehension. You watch trucks arrive throughout the night, disgorging enough inflatable equipment to create the 6th largest army in Europe, if it were real. Engineers work with assembly line efficiency, inflating more tanks than some actual armored divisions possess. The sonic units deploy speakers across 10 square miles. Radio operators prepare to juggle dozens of fictional identities simultaneously. It's industrial-scale deception, the military theatre equivalent of staging a dozen Broadway shows simultaneously. The attention to detail reaches obsessive perfection. Ghost army soldiers create false supply dumps with real supplies on top to fool aerial reconnaissance. They establish fake hospitals complete with Red Cross markings and actual medical personnel treating the handful of genuinely injured. You help construct a motor pool where mechanics performatively repair inflatable vehicles, going through authentic maintenance motions on machines that will never run. The performance has become so method that reality and fiction interweave seamlessly. German observation intensifies as the operation builds. You spot at least 6 enemy reconnaissance aircraft in a single morning, photographing every detail. Ghost army soldiers wave at the planes with calculated casualness, cigarettes dangling from their lips, playing the role of confident Americans preparing for assault. Meanwhile, the real Ninth Army moves into position 30 miles north, hidden by this elaborate theatrical smokescreen. The radio deception reaches symphonic complexity. You listen to operators manage a telecommunications symphony, supply requests, medical reports, weather observations, personal messages, all creating the electronic signature of 30,000 men preparing for combat. One operator simultaneously maintains 3 different arguments between fictional officers about bridge crossing priorities. Another fakes equipment breakdowns, complete with frustrated exchanges with imaginary motor pools. They're improvising military fiction in real time, with German lives hanging on every transmitted word. Physical exhaustion threatens the illusion. Ghost army soldiers have been running at triple capacity for 72 hours. You see men falling asleep standing up, propped against inflatable tanks they're supposed to be guarding. One artist, delirious from exhaustion, starts touching up the paint on a rubber Sherman at 3 a.m., determined to fix a rust streak only he can see. Officers quietly rotate personnel before German observers notice guards who've been on duty for impossible lengths. The moment of truth arrives at dawn. German artillery opens up on Ghost Army positions with everything they have, a bombardment that would devastate an actual division. You huddle in a reinforced bunker as the world explodes around you. Inflatable tanks cartwheel through the air like deadly parade balloons. Speakers vaporize in direct hits. The sonic library of 4 years' work scatters across German soil in burning fragments. But the violence confirms success. The Germans completely believe the threat. Radio operators perform their finest hour under fire. As shells crater their positions, they maintain the fiction, transmitting damage reports that match what German observers would expect to see. 3rd Battalion, taking heavy casualties, request immediate medical support. Tank Company Bravo has lost 60% effectiveness. Every word is a lie wrapped in the truth of actual explosions. You watch one operator continue transmitting even as shrapnel peppers the walls around him. His fictional panic indistinguishable from anyone's real terror under bombardment. Then comes the news everyone's been praying for. The real Ninth Army has crossed the Rhine against minimal opposition. German reserves remain fixed at Viersen, pounding the hell out of rubber and recordings. The Ghost Army has achieved its greatest magic trick, making 30,000 men appear from thin air while actual divisions vanish like smoke. Conservative estimates credit this operation with saving 10,000 American casualties. The withdrawal unfolds like the world's strangest retreat. Ghost Army units must simulate the gradual degradation of 2 divisions under German pressure. They deflate tanks in specific patterns to match expected loss ratios. Radio traffic shifts from offensive planning to defensive coordination, even in fictional defeat. Every detail must ring true. You help pack up equipment still smoking from near misses, rolling up the stage set of the war's most successful theatrical production. As you leave Viersen, you look back at fields cratered by German artillery, all that firepower wasted on ghosts and echoes. The Ghost Army has written its masterpiece in smoke and deception, saving more lives with fake tanks than most units did with real ones. But the cost shows in the 1,000-yard stares of artists who've spent too long living in the space between truth and fiction. You're sitting in a demobilization center in New Jersey, watching Ghost Army veterans struggle with the strangest readjustment of any returning soldiers. The war in Europe has ended, but these men carry a burden unique among veterans. They can't tell anyone what they did. As they sign document after document, each one reminds them that discussing their service means federal prison. A private from Ohio jokes bitterly that he's the only soldier in history who could be arrested for accurately describing his war experience. The security briefings are Kafkaesque in their thoroughness. You listen to intelligence officers explain that Ghost Army operations remain classified beyond top secret, that even mentioning the unit's existence violates the Espionage Act. Veterans must create cover stories for their service, pretending they were in conventional units. One artist asks what he should tell his wife about the scars from German shrapnel. Tell her you were in regular artillery. The officer responds, but I don't know anything about artillery. The artist protests. Then you'd better learn, comes the reply. The psychological weight manifests immediately. You watch a radio operator at a welcome home party. Friends asking about his service. He starts to describe maintaining tanks in France. Catches himself. Realizes he's describing inflatable tanks. And goes silent. His buddies think he's traumatized by combat memories. In a way, they're right. But the trauma is being unable to explain that he fought the war with speakers and rubber, that his victories were measured in successful deceptions rather than destroyed enemies. Family reunions become exercises in creative fiction. A Ghost Army veteran shows you letters from his mother, proud that her son served in the Fighting 4th Armored Division, a unit he successfully impersonated but never belonged to. He can't correct her. His fictional war service has become his official history. Children grow up believing their fathers were traditional combat soldiers, never knowing Dad's Purple Heart came from defending balloon tanks. The art world offers no refuge. Ghost Army artists return to find their styles irrevocably changed, but they can't explain why. You visit a gallery opening where a former Ghost Army painter displays abstract works full of fractured identities and dissolved realities. Critics praise his surrealist vision without understanding it comes from lived experience of making lies tangible. He smiles tightly at their interpretations, unable to say his aesthetic was forged by militarized deception. Employment proves surprisingly difficult. How do you translate created phantom armies into civilian job skills? Former sonic engineers apply to radio stations but can't explain their experience in acoustic warfare. Artists interview at advertising agencies, unable to showcase their best work, convincing Nazi intelligence that rubber was steel. One veteran tells you he listed special effects on his resume, letting employers assume he meant Hollywood when he really meant the European theatre. Marriages strain under the weight of unshared secrets. You meet a wife who knows something happened to her husband in France, something that makes him wake up checking if things are real or inflated. He can't explain why he distrusts surfaces, why he compulsively taps objects to ensure they're solid. She assumes it's regular combat trauma, never guessing he spent 2 years in a world where nothing was what it seemed, and reality itself became negotiable. The veterans developed their own underground network. you attend a reunion disguised as a regular army unit gathering where ghost army members finally speak freely. They trade stories impossible to share elsewhere. The night German tanks almost ran over deflated Shermans. The time a radio operator forgot which fictional unit he was impersonating mid-transmission. The absurdity of bronze stars for exceptional balloon maintenance under fire. For a few hours, they don't have to pretend their war was conventional. Some channel their experience into acceptable outlets. AMT. A former Ghost Army officer becomes a pioneer in corporate strategic planning, applying deception tactics to business competition. Another establishes a special effects company, using skills learned making rubber look like steel to create Hollywood illusions. They succeed wildly, but can never explain their qualification source. Their resumes contain a 2-year gap labeled simply military service. The isolation weighs heaviest during regular veteran gatherings. You watch Ghost Army men at VFW halls, listening to other soldiers describe conventional combat while staying silent about their own service. They can't trade war stories about the time they fooled an entire German division with recorded sound. Can't explain scars received defending inflatable equipment. They're veterans without a narrative, warriors whose victories remain classified. 50 years of silence stretches ahead of them. Young men age into grandfathers who can't tell their grandchildren about their service. Ghost Army veterans die, taking their stories to graves marked with units they never served in. The most successful military deception in history continues long after the war, as hundreds of men maintain one final illusion, that they were ordinary soldiers in an ordinary war. You're sitting in a dusty Pentagon archive room in 1996, watching an elderly man's hands shake as he opens a box marked declassified for the first time in 50 years. The Ghost Army's secrets are finally being released, and veterans in their 70s are seeing their own after-action reports for the first time. One former radio operator breaks down crying as he reads German intelligence assessments of his fictional transmissions. They believed every word, he whispers. Every damn word of our lies saved lives. The declassification happens almost by accident. You learn that a persistent military historian named Rick Beyer stumbled across references to special troops in overlooked documents. His research reveals an entire unit scrubbed from official histories. When he contacts the Pentagon, bureaucrats initially insist no such unit existed, but the paperwork tells a different story. Requisitions for inflatable tanks, invoices for theatrical makeup, reports that read like rejected movie scripts. The evidence is too extensive to deny. Veterans' reactions to freedom vary wildly. Some embrace the chance to finally tell their stories, words tumbling out after 5 decades of silence. You interview a former sonic engineer who demonstrates, using his grandson's stereo, how he layered tank sounds to create acoustic depth. His family sits stunned as Grandpa reveals he wasn't in the regular artillery, but in an unit so secret it officially didn't exist. His wife of 48 years touches his face gently. This explains so much, she says. Others find the adjustment impossible. A Ghost Army artist shows you canvases he painted over after the war. Gorgeous sketches of inflatable tanks buried under layers of abstract expressionism. He can't bring himself to reveal them even now. I spent 50 years learning not to talk, he explains. You can't just turn that off. The habit of secrecy has become stronger than the secret itself. Silence calcified into identity. The historical community reacts with scholarly chaos. Military historians must rewrite entire chapters of World War II history. Battles need reinterpretation. German decisions that seemed inexplicable now make perfect sense when you factor in phantom divisions. You attend academic conferences where professors argue whether the Ghost Army represents the birth of modern information warfare or the culmination of ancient military deception. Papers with titles like Ontological Warfare, Reality as Weapon in the ETO proliferate. Museums scramble to create exhibits about a unit that spent 50 years not existing. You help curate a display at the Army Heritage Center, watching visitors' faces as they encounter inflatable tanks for the first time. Children think it's hilarious, balloon tanks, while veterans stand silent, processing how fundamentally they've misunderstood the war. One D-Day veteran mutters, "We always wondered why the Germans were out of position. Now I know. They were chasing ghosts." The French government awards the Ghost Army veterans delayed recognition. You attend a ceremony in Luxembourg where mayors of small towns thank elderly Americans for deceptions that drew German fire away from civilian areas. A French resistance fighter, now in her 80s, embraces a Ghost Army veteran. "We reported on your movements to the Allies," she says. "We never knew you weren't real. You fooled everyone, even your friends, on the complexity of their service, lying to enemies and allies alike, finally receives understanding. Documentary filmmakers descend on surviving veterans. You watch interview sessions where these men, finally free to speak, struggle to make their experience comprehensible. How do you explain fighting a war with art supplies? One veteran brings his grandson's inflatable pool toy to demonstrate tank construction. Another plays recordings on vintage equipment, showing how 20 speakers could simulate 1,000 vehicles. The filmmaker's questions reveal how thoroughly the Ghost Army's reality violates civilian assumptions about warfare. Personal revelations reshape family histories. A daughter learns her father's nervous breakdown in 1944 came not from combat trauma, but from maintaining 17 different radio personalities while under artillery fire. A son discovers his dad's post-war career in advertising wasn't random, but direct application of military deception skills. Grandchildren finally understand why Grandpa always checked if things were real, why he tapped walls and distrusted surfaces, habits born from a world where tanks were balloons and armies were theatre. The art world reassesses Ghost Army veterans' work with new context. Paintings dismissed as derivative surrealism are revealed as documentary realism. The artist really did see tanks that deflated, armies that vanished, battles fought with sound and light. Major museums acquire pieces that spent decades in basements. You attend a retrospective where a Ghost Army artist, now in his 80s, explains his work for the first time. "This isn't imagination," he tells the crowd. "This is what deception looks like from the inside." As more documents emerge, the Ghost Army's influence on modern warfare becomes clear. Their techniques presaged electronic warfare, information operations, modern psyops. Military colleges add Ghost Army case studies to curricula. You realize these artists didn't just fight World War II. They invented entirely new ways to wage war, turning perception itself into a weapon. You're standing in Arlington National Cemetery in 2020. 5. Attending the funeral of one of the last Ghost Army veterans. His grandchildren place an inflatable tank, a child's pool toy, next to the flag-draped coffin, and no one needs to explain why. The few remaining veterans, now centenarians, salute their fallen comrade with hands that once painted fake insignias and operated phantom radios. As Taps plays, you realize you're witnessing the end of living memory, the transformation of experience into history. The Ghost Army's legacy permeates modern warfare in ways its creators never imagined. You visit a military training facility where soldiers learn perception management, using virtual reality and deepfakes, technologies that make inflatable tanks seem quaint. An instructor, himself a military historian, explains how the Ghost Army pioneered the concept that in modern conflict, what enemies believe matters more than what actually exists. They turn war into a mental construct, he says. Every drone swarm decoy, every digital false flag, every piece of electronic deception, it all started with artists and rubber tanks. Popular culture has finally discovered the Ghost Army, though Hollywood struggles to capture the surreal reality. You screen a new film where action heroes operate inflatable tanks, but it misses the profound weirdness of artists debating Mondrian while defending rubber weapons. Video games let players command phantom divisions, reducing existential deception to point-and-click strategy. The veterans' families watch these adaptations with bemused frustration. They always make it seem clever and fun. One daughter tells you, they don't show dad waking up at night, unsure what's real. Academic study has evolved into an entire discipline. Universities offer courses in deception studies, tracing a lineage from Sun Tzu through the Ghost Army to modern information warfare. You attend a doctoral defense where a student argues the Ghost Army represents the first postmodern military unit. Their reality-questioning operations preceding philosophical movements by decades. The committee debates whether making enemies question fundamental reality constitutes a war crime or military innovation. Technology companies recruit based on Ghost Army principles. You tour a Silicon Valley firm where perception engineers design augmented reality systems for military applications. Their conference room is named after Bill Blass, fashion designer turned ghost soldier. The CEO, a former army officer, explains how the Ghost Army proved that creativity and deception are force multipliers more powerful than conventional weapons. They showed us that making someone believe something false is often more effective than destroying something real. Veterans' families grapple with complicated legacies. You meet grandchildren who've become artists, saying they're continuing family tradition even though their inspiration came from military deception. Others join intelligence services, applying inherited lessons about the malleable nature of truth. One great-granddaughter shows you her doctoral thesis on inherited trauma in deception operations, exploring how growing up with family members who professionally lied affects subsequent generations' relationship with truth. International military academies study the Ghost Army as both inspiration and warning. You observe a NATO workshop where officers debate the ethics of deception operations. When does military theatre cross into problematic manipulation? If everything can be faked, how do we maintain meaningful concepts of military honor? A German officer notes wryly that his grandfather's diary mentions the Ghost Army. He died attacking inflatable tanks, never knowing he'd been deceived. The room falls silent at this reminder that successful deception has human costs. Museums worldwide now feature Ghost Army exhibits, but displaying deception proves challenging. How do you showcase something designed not to be seen? You help design an interactive display where visitors experience the war from German intelligence perspectives, slowly realizing the American forces they're tracking don't exist. Most find it deeply unsettling. "I don't trust anything now," one teenager says after completing the exhibit. The curator nods. That's exactly the point. The last veterans pass away as you write this history, taking with them the visceral knowledge of weaponized unreality. Their obituaries struggle to capture lives spent between truth and fiction. Master of Deception sounds like a con artist, not a war hero. Served in special operations implies conventional secrecy, not inflatable tanks. Language itself lacks vocabulary for their service, forcing families to accept that even in death, the full truth remains slightly out of focus. But their influence ripples outward, transforming how we understand conflict, reality, even art itself. Every deepfake video, every social media manipulation, every moment when you question if what you're seeing is real, you're experiencing the Ghost Army's legacy. They prove that in modern conflict, perception is reality, that wars can be won by making enemies believe in illusions. They were artists who became soldiers who remained artists, painting new realities with rubber and sound and radio waves. The final Ghost Army veteran's funeral ends with full military honors. As the flag is folded and presented to his family, a slight breeze makes everyone pause. For just a moment, it sounds like distant tank engines, but it's only the wind through Arlington's trees. Reality asserting itself one last time over the lingering echoes of the most successful deception in military history. As you walk among the headstones in the gathering dusk, you realize the Ghost Army's greatest trick wasn't fooling the Germans. It was showing us that reality itself is more fragile, more constructed, more dependent on belief than we ever dared imagine. They didn't just win a war, they changed how we understand truth itself. Their story drifts now from memory into myth, from fact into legend, which seems fitting for men who spent their war making legends tangible and facts negotiable. Somewhere tonight, in museums and military colleges, in Silicon Valley workshops and Hollywood studios, their Ghost Army marches on, no longer rubber and recordings but ideas and influence, teaching each new generation that sometimes the most powerful weapon is making someone believe in something that was never there at all. And as your eyes grow heavy, listening to this tale of artists at war, you might wonder how much of what you believe is real, how much is carefully crafted theatre, designed by unseen hands for purposes you'll never know. The Ghost Army's final deception might be making us all question the surface of things, tap the world to see what's solid, what's inflated, what's merely recorded sound, played through hidden speakers in the darkness. Sweet dreams are made of knowing what's real. The Ghost Army made sure we'd never quite know again. Their rubber tanks have long since rotted, their recordings gone silent, their radio frequencies returned to static. But late at night, when you're not quite sure if that sound outside is real or imagined, when shadows seem too perfect to be natural, when coincidence feels crafted, that's them. Still deceiving, still protecting, still making us wonder if anything is quite what it seems